Everyone, and thank you so much for pre-ordering a copy of Think Like a Rocket Scientist. I really appreciate your support. I put together this video for you to distill 5 strategies from the book in just 3-minute bites. So let's get going right away. First, what George Costanza and rocket scientists have in common. Seinfeld is one of my favorite shows of all time, and this is George Costanza. There's an episode of Seinfeld which I particularly like where Costanza sets out to improve his life by doing the opposite of what he had done before. So he does this at work, he does this with his relationships. There's a section in the book where I talk about how rocket scientists have used this question of what if we did the reverse to come up with a technology that we use on a daily basis, which is GPS, the Global Positioning System. I won't retell the story here, you can read about it in the book, but I do want to take a minute here just to discuss the importance of this strategy. So instead of adopting what you might think of as a common best practice or the industry standard, reframing the question by asking, what if we did the reverse, can be really powerful. Even if you don't execute, the simple process of thinking through the opposite will often make you question your assumptions and jolt you out of your current perspective. One of my favorite examples of this is from athletics. Until the 1960s, high jump athletes would use a style called the straddle method, where they would jump face first over the bar, which is what you're seeing in this photo here. Now, at the time, the straddle method was considered beyond improvement. There was no need to experiment or come up with something new. But then an athlete named Dick Fosbury from the great state of Oregon decided to flip the high jump script. Now, at the time, if you had met Fosbury in person, you wouldn't think he was an athlete. He was awkward, scrawny, and tall. He had this significant acne problem that he couldn't seem to shake off. But he prided himself on thinking differently from other people and asking himself from time to time, what if I did the reverse? The straddle method never worked for Fosbury. When he was a sophomore in high school, he was performing at a junior high level. And one day, on the bus ride to a meet, he had an epiphany. He realized that the rules allowed the athletes to jump any way they wanted as long as they launched off of one foot. So instead of jumping face first parallel to the bar like everyone had done before him, he jumped back first. Now, this was outrageous, a complete departure from expected norms. People made fun of him. Fans laughed at him from the stands as he cleared the bar like a fish flopping on a boat. A newspaper actually called him the world's laziest high jumper. But he proved his critics wrong by taking home the gold medal in the 1968 Summer Olympics by doing the exact opposite of what everybody else was doing. The method, which is now known as the Fosbury flop, is the standard method used by all high jumpers. Now, Fosbury knew something that most of us neglect in both of our personal and professional lives. The low-hanging fruits in life have already been picked. You often cannot beat a stronger competitor by copying them, but you can beat them by doing the opposite of what they're doing. Okay. Principle number 2, how invisible rules constrain your thinking and what to do about it. There's a fable of a great saint who would lead his followers in meditation. Just as the followers were dropping into their Zen moments, they would be disrupted by a cat who would walk through the temple meowing and purring as cats do and bothering everybody. The saint came up with a simple solution. He began to tie the cat to a pole during meditation sessions. Now, the solution quickly developed into a ritual. Tie the cat to the pole first, meditate second. When the cat eventually died of natural causes, a religious crisis ensued. Now, the followers were like, wait, what are we supposed to do? How could we possibly meditate without tying the cat to the pole? The story illustrates what I call invisible rules. These are habits and behaviors that have unnecessarily rigidified into rules. They're unlike written rules, which are visible. The written rules are right there in the standard operating procedures and can be amended or deleted. And although written rules can also be stubborn to change, invisible rules are even more stubborn. These are the silent killers that constrain our thinking without us even being aware of it. We're perfectly capable of meditating without the cat, but we don't even realize it. We then make things worse by defending our self-imposed limitations. We could do things differently, we say, but our supply chain, our software, our budgets, our skill set, our education, our this or that does not allow it. Well, as the saying goes, argue for your limitations and you get to keep them. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's often misattributed to Isaac Asimov, but Alan Alda actually said it in a commencement speech. Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off once in a while or the light won't come in. So think about it. What in your world is a cat from the meditation fable? An unnecessary relic of the past, clouding your thinking and hampering forward progress. What do you assume you're supposed to do simply because everyone else around you is doing it? Can you question that assumption and replace it with something better? So ask yourself, what if you hadn't installed this equipment? What if you hadn't implemented this process? Would you do the same thing that you are doing today? It's important here to demand current, not historical evidence. Many of our invisible rules were developed in response to problems that no longer exist, like that cat from the meditation fable. But the immune response remains long after the pathogen leaves. By the way, the best way to figure out what invisible rules are to just violate them. Go for a seeming moonshot that you don't think you'll achieve. Ask for a raise or a promotion that you don't think you deserve. You'll find, after all, that it is possible to meditate without the cat. Principle number 3, what you should do first in tackling an audacious goal. You've just been put in charge of a particularly difficult problem or project at work. Your boss says you have to get a monkey to stand on a pedestal and then train it to recite passages from Shakespeare. How do you begin? This is a question that Astra Teller, who is the captain of moonshots at Google X, and yes, that's his real title, likes to ask audiences. The company is now known simply as X. It's a notoriously secretive company dedicated to finding radical solutions to huge problems by developing breakthrough technologies like self-driving cars, autonomous drones, etc. Now, if you're like most people, you begin this audacious project of getting the monkey to stand on a pedestal and recite lines from Shakespeare by building a pedestal. Because at some point, the boss is going to pop by and ask for a status update, and you want to be able to show off something other than a long list of reasons why teaching a monkey to talk is really, really hard, as Astra Teller explains. You'd rather have the boss give you a pat on the back and say, hey, nice pedestal, great job. So you build the pedestal and you wait for a Shakespeare reciting monkey to magically materialize. But here's the problem. Building the pedestal is the easy part. You can always build the pedestal, Astra Teller says, but the risk and the learning comes from the extremely hard work of first training the monkey. If the project has an Achilles heel, if the monkey can't be trained to talk, let alone recite lines from Shakespeare, you want to know that up front. But there is far more certainty from our perspective in building a pedestal than in getting a monkey to talk, right? We know how to build pedestals, so we build them. In our lives, we spend our time doing what we know best, writing emails, attending endless meetings, instead of tackling the hardest part of a project. And it's not like building pedestals is completely unjustified. After all, the project requires the monkey to stand on a pedestal. So carving the pedestal gives us the satisfaction of doing something about the problem and getting some sense of progress while postponing the inevitable. All that churn feels productive, but it's not. We end up building a beautiful pedestal, but the monkey still isn't talking. Here's the thing. What's easy often isn't important, and what's important often isn't easy. The next time you're tempted to build a pedestal, train the monkey to talk first. Okay, strategy number 4, the one word you can use to boost your creativity. This is a really short, really simple, but very powerful strategy. that's backed by research. So in one study, 3 Harvard Business School professors gave participants a difficult ethical challenge. They laid out a scenario where the ethical choice wasn't obvious and divided the study's participants into 2 groups. To one group, they asked, "What should you do?" And to the other group, they asked, "What could you do?" And the people, or the participants who were asked, "What could you do?" generated far more creative solutions. A different study reached the same conclusion. A set of participants were told that object A is a dog's chew toy. Another group in the same study was told object A could be a dog's chew toy. And again, in this study as well, the people who were told could be a dog's chew toy were able to generate a greater variety of different uses for the toy. So instead of asking yourself, what should you do? Ask yourself, what could you do? It's simple, but the effect can be extraordinary. Strategy number 5, the final one, an unstoppable astronaut training strategy that you can use. Now, this is based on a cardinal rule from rocket science called test as you fly, fly as you test. According to this rule, tests on Earth must mimic, to the greatest extent possible, the same conditions in flight. So rocket scientists test a spacecraft as the spacecraft will fly, and if the test is successful, the flight has to take place under conditions as close as possible to the test. Because in a machine as complicated as a rocket, any significant deviance between the test and the flight can result in disaster. The same principle applies in the training of astronauts as well. The day-to-day reality of an astronaut's life is vastly different than the glamour that you see in Hollywood movies. Astronauts are not space cowboys. They are workhorses. They don't fly in space for a living. They train and prepare for a living. By the time astronauts fly on their missions, they've flown the route countless times on simulators. The simulators generate crises on Earth, which prepare astronauts for actual crises in space. They practice things like computer crashes and engine troubles and explosions while constantly asking themselves, what is the next thing that could potentially kill me? An athlete named Amelia Boone uses the same strategy in her training. If you don't know who she is, she's one of the best obstacle course racers in the world. She's also a corporate attorney by day at Apple. When she first started training to compete in her first obstacle course race, she could not do a single pull-up. She's now a 4-time world champion. And her training regimen involves testing as you fly. She subjects her body to the same conditions that she's going to face on race day. When she was living in Chicago and practicing law there, in an interview, she explains how she'd go for a run in a wetsuit across, or actually not across, that wouldn't work, along Lake Michigan, while dunking herself in and out of the icy waters of the lake. And that's because obstacle races that Boone competes in take place in these frigid temperatures, and participants are wearing wetsuits to prevent hypothermia. So her secret is to train in the same environment that she's going to experience on race day, while her competition trains from the comfort of a gym because it happens to be raining outside. She says, you don't race on a treadmill with Netflix in front of you, so you shouldn't be doing your training like that. The rain, the snow, the dark, the cold, the wetsuit, they all beckon Boone. And by the time the race comes around, she's been desensitized to the brutal conditions awaiting her. She greets them with a smile that seems to say, nice to see you again. Let's dance. And most of us don't do what astronauts and Amelia Boone do. We train in conditions that don't mimic reality. We practice a major speech in the comfort of our home when we're fully rested and awake. We do mock job interviews in our sweatpants with a friend using a preset set of questions. If we applied the test as you fly rule, we would practice our speech in an unfamiliar setting after drinking a few espressos to give us the same type of jitters that we're going to have on game day. We would do mock interviews while wearing an uncomfortable suit and with a stranger ready to throw curveballs at us. Whether it's a rocket launch, athletic training, or a job interview, the underlying principle is the same. Test as you fly. Subject yourself to the same conditions you'll experience during flight, and you will soon begin to soar. That's it. Thank you so much again for pre-ordering a copy of the book and supporting my writing. I really appreciate it, and thank you for listening.